Okay, I kind of hate the lighting, but we're gonna go with it anyway. I'm still kind of starting to figure out how I want to do these library return videos. But we're just gonna go with this because I don't want to work too much harder than I already am. So this is what you get. I am going to the library today. It's what I do on my days off, I guess. And I've sort of spent some of the morning thinking about these books a little bit more. I like having this moment to sort of reflect on what I've been reading. It's been kind of a rough couple of weeks for me, so I haven't been doing this, but I kind of want to get back into it. So we're gonna do this, and I'm just gonna post whatever happens here, and hopefully I'll get more polished as time goes on, but this is where we're at for today. So yeah, I'm gonna return all of these books today. Some of these are actually due, and some of these are, I'm just returning them because they, I'm kind of done with them. So, yeah, we've got Husbands. I actually did not read the physical copy of this, like, at all. I still think I'm going to return it today because I kind of got what I needed to out of it. It was really fun. I listened to the audiobook probably a couple of weeks ago now. I just kind of forgot to talk about it. I'm not great at talking about audiobooks because I don't have the physical copy to be like, hey, look, this is the book I read. But yeah, so now I do have the physical copy. So hey, look, this is the book I read 2 weeks ago. I really enjoyed this one. This was a lot of fun. I really liked the way the whole concept of like looking for a partner was explored. And that it was done from both sides. And I think it's because there is at one point one of the husbands. I guess you kind of need to look up the book in order to understand what this was even about. But basically this woman, I think she lives alone. One day a guy comes down from the attic and it turns out it's her husband and they've been married for 7 years. And somehow she entered into like an alternate reality. She's been married and she has to kind of like figure out what her life is like with this new guy in this new world that she's somehow entered into. And at some point the husband goes back into the attic for something, and when he comes back down, it's a different guy and she's in yet another different reality. And this goes on and on and on and on. And at one point one of the husbands is aware of the changes, the way that she is, and he's going through the same thing, but he's in a different house every time. Whereas for her, she's stuck in the house. She's stuck with the husband unless he goes into the attic. And I think that that is a really interesting metaphor for relationships in our world and how women have to navigate them. The house domestic stuff. So really interesting book. I would love to talk to somebody about it who had read it thoroughly and really thought about it, because there's a lot to go with on this one. I thought it was really good. So highly recommend. Still returning the book without doing a deeper read. This one, I know I listened to the audiobook. What did I do with my... So I was trying to figure out how much of this I actually listened to. I know I looked at it. It's a really weird cover. Like, I don't think this indicates anything about what the book is about. I don't know how far I got because I was listening to the audio, and then this is another one where like, look, I have the physical copy now, so I'm going to talk about it, but I don't remember how much of the audiobook I listened to, and I don't remember, I don't know, but anyway, I never looked at the physical copy. So, I have it, but I'm going to return it. Maybe I should hold on to it. I don't know. I'll think about it. But I think I'm done with it. It was a really interesting story. So this is We Lived on the Horizon by Erika Swyler. There's this whole thing where there's a walled city, and then there's cataclysms outside. So if you read Blood Over Brighthaven, I feel like there's a fairly similar thing going on here. What's not as clear is there's robots. and computers that sort of run things. So another book that I'm thinking about returning today, or maybe I already did. Hang on. Sorry, I just realized I didn't grab this one. But I think We Lived on the Horizon has a lot in common with Blood Over Brighthaven because you're in this city that's walled off. There's sort of aristocrats. It's not really clear to me yet with where I was. But there does seem to be this idea of like everything's sort of falling apart. And the computers are also kind of like becoming sentient, and the robots and stuff. And the main character, I think, is going to be a key part of that. I don't know that I'm going to read much more of this than I already have. It didn't really capture me. It seemed like a really interesting world, but I also didn't finish Blood Over Brighthaven. And I probably won't return to that. I see what people are enjoying about it, and I kind of get the concept of Blood Over Brighthaven. You have another walled city. Turns out there's a lot of, corruption happening and really terrible things that are a result of the wall and the city itself. And I think that something similar is going on here, but I don't actually know. So if you liked Blood Over Brighthaven, you might like this, and maybe you can tell me if it's worth going back to it, because I'm done for now. But the reason I brought this out is because this is also another one where the robots are becoming sort of sentient, and there seems to be this, like, the humans are sort of disappearing, which is what this seems to be doing too. Like, the main character in this is replacing herself. Her new apprentice is actually her robot that seems to have been inherited. And having a robot and a house and all the computers and stuff seems to be sort of an aristocracy kind of a deal, which you also have in Blood Over Brighthaven. There's that whole caste system going on. And that was also true in Service Model. In this case, so this is Adrian Tchaikovsky. This is the first book I've ever read by him. I know he's got tons of other books. I'm going to get to them eventually, hopefully. But the robot is becoming sort of sentient. And there's this whole thing about a protagonist virus, where the robot is accused of having the protagonist virus, which makes him obsolete as a robot and kind of dangerous. And I guess the other thing that I should mention that I've been reading along with these, this one's going to be kind of funky because I did read the book. There was a book club I saw on Fable that I decided to join that was reading the Murderbot books, because Murderbot is coming out on Apple TV as a series, I believe, in I think May. So I actually do have the audiobook for the second book in the Murderbot trilogy series on Libby right now. I have not started reading it, but I finished the first book really quickly because they're only like a couple hours. Like, see, this is only 3 hours and 21 minutes, and you can see I usually listen at 1.5. I will go much faster than that, so I'll finish these fairly quickly. There is one book that's like 14 hours, I think, but most of them are pretty short. And I do want to read them all before the series comes out. I'm really glad I read the first one. It was a lot of fun. I think out of all of these, where it's like, oh, robots becoming sentient, of these three, I guess that doesn't include Blood Over Brighthaven, but the Murderbot books, I think I enjoyed this one the most, mostly because the robot was so much more sentient. So I guess that's kind of not fair for these other books because they're dealing with the beginning of the developing of sentience on these robots. So they're not very, like, I also just finished watching Severance like an hour ago. So it's interesting to think about, like, the one thing they talk about in Severance with the innies is how they are not, they say it in the first season with Miss Casey. They talk about how she is less developed than the other innies who have more time in the Lumen hallways, and Miss Casey is only alive for like 8 hours overall the entire time we know her, which is crazy. So I think it's kind of that idea of like they are less complex beings because they haven't existed long enough to develop that complexity. So I think that is a bit of a problem with these books compared to Murderbot. So I'm really excited to keep going with Murderbot. I am probably DNFing both of these books, and I also DNF'd Blood Over Brighthaven. But I do think that there's common traits between these and Blood Over Brighthaven, and there's common traits between these and Murderbot, but there is not much in common between Blood Over Brighthaven and Murderbot. Unless, I don't know, I guess murder, kind of. But anyway, those two are going back. I'm DNFing those. This was one that I was really excited about. I've seen other people be excited about. This is Good Girl by Aria Aber. I don't actually know how to say her name. And I know she's a poet, but I've never read any of her other work. I did not find this very interesting. It's just a girl who parties a lot, and she's, I think, Palestinian, right? Or maybe just from the Middle East somewhere. Afghan. She's Afghan. Okay. And that has, some impact on her ability to go out and party and how she feels about it. But honestly, I just didn't feel like it was any different than other books that are kind of about a girl going out and partying. So I didn't get very far with this either. I didn't really look at the, I didn't do any tabs or anything. So, yeah, this one I am DNFing. I guess once again, anything I DNF, I would appreciate reasons to try to go back to it. If it is worth doing. I can't think of anything in particular, any books in particular that it reminds me of. I just know that I feel like I have already read this. And I wonder if part of that is like, this isn't really even remotely the same thing because he's a writer, but like I was talking about this book not too long ago. I got it again, I think, from the library, and I don't really know why, because I don't know if I want to read more of it. But it is kind of I don't know, I feel like the characters are kind of similar. But they're not really. So I think that's probably what I'm thinking of when I'm like, oh, I feel like I've read this book before. I don't think I have. I think it is an original story, but it doesn't feel like it. And I think I'm kind of done with it. I was just looking at this wall of books and I realized I don't want to read this one either. So I'm going to add that to this stack of things to return today. I've got my little cart of library books over here. Yeah, we're gonna return this one too, so I might as well just mention that, I guess. And I don't know if I even should. It's not really like this at all, honestly. But I also read The Forest King's Daughter, or I started reading this. I think this one's probably gonna be pretty good, honestly, but I'm also DNFing this. And I guess the only reason I'm bringing this up is I'm DNFing this, and this is also sort of like a fantasy, and yeah, she's a witch. Maybe I should keep this one, actually. I might keep this because I like this idea of a witch over here, a witch of Appalachia, so I might read more of it, but it didn't pull me in at all. So, but it was an interesting concept. Moth Eater by Linda H. Kodega. Just, you don't get a lot of stuff from Appalachia, and it seems like maybe I'll hold on to that one. So I don't think I am returning that one today. But it does kind of remind me of this just because this one was surprising. This is The Forest King's Daughter by Elly Blake. Great cover, by the way. And I think I kind of liked the Romeo and Juliet aspect of this. So it's a guy from the underworld kingdom meets the Forest King's daughter in the woods, and he kind of falls in love with her as a crush, basically, when they're kids. And he gives her a token, which it turns out is actually a ring of power of some kind, and it gives her a lot of power. And I think that one, it's kind of interesting, the way the power dynamics are going to work out, and it looks like it's a pretty interesting fantasy world. So I think I would maybe want to give this more time, but there's too many other things I want to read, so I'm DNFing it. And it is one where if somebody else talks a lot about it, I'm probably going to be really interested to hear what your experience was reading it, but I'm not sure I would ever be convinced to spend more time with it than I have. But I did like the relationship. I thought the characters were sort of interesting. It feels unique. It feels like a different take on the whole romantasy thing. It is instant love, but it's instant love from the guy's perspective, which, in my experience, is very true to life. And I think that it is kind of playing with that idea too, that he fell in love with her instantly when they were children, and it caused problems for everybody. But there's also sort of a like Helen of Troy thing going on here, where I don't know if you know the story of Helen, but Paris from Troy takes Helen from a Greek king, and that's what starts the whole Trojan War. And like, the Trojan War was probably going to happen whether or not Paris and Helena fell in love anyway, but yeah. I think that this is kind of that too. Like, the war was coming, and the like betrayal of the boy is just kind of the last match on the fire that finally makes everything go. But I am sort of curious about it. I still don't, I think I'm going to return it because I don't have time. But that seemed much more promising than a lot of the other romantasy novels have to me. So, better. I actually finished this book. So this is Vantage Point by Sara Sligar. I don't know how to say her name. It was kind of a weird one. This is a thriller. I'm not big on thrillers. It's also a story told about rich people, which is something I'm never really a huge fan of. I find it sort of frustrating that we're constantly talking about rich people's problems and we ignore the problems of the poor people, not even poor people, just the not rich people who surround them, whose lives are actually much more complex and difficult most of the time. And for some reason, we're not interested in their stories. And so I did kind of have that problem with this, where it is rich people. But the thriller aspect of it was actually really well done. I don't usually like thrillers, so I guess that is something to consider. The main character, well, not main character, so you've got, there's sort of like a Kennedy type family. The older brother is running for a Senate seat, and it's his sister has like a sex tape come up from previously in her life, but it seems like it's probably fake, but she can't remember because she was not in a good space for a lot of her life, and had an eating disorder and was really out of it for a long period of time in her youth, and she is not sure if it actually happened or not. So that part of it is kind of interesting too, that we have this unreliable narrator going on. But in the end, I feel like it was still just a thriller, even with all of these like little bells and whistles that kind of made it different. It's just a thriller, and I'm not a big thriller fan. But if you are a thriller fan, I would say that this is probably more like a kind of thing that a reader of my type would be more into than most of the thrillers I see being recommended. I think it's just a little bit more complex. I think there's the way the characters are explored is much more interesting, because you also have the brother's wife, who is the best friend of the sister from when they were children. So it kind of adds a lot of depth to it, I think. And she is sort of the like not poor person in their lives, whose life becomes much more complicated because she engages with them. But I still feel like it doesn't really give her life outside of their wealth enough time. And I kind of wish it did. But it does give some time, and I think that's something to consider. So I think I'm still recommending it. I did actually finish it, so that's a huge recommendation right there, that I finished a book, because I don't do that very often. But yeah, that one's going back because I am done with it, and I think it's due. This one is one that I read earlier this year. It was one of the first books I read this year. I got the physical copy again and this is The Repeat Room by Jessie Ball. I really need to get better about giving the titles. when I talk about these books. So this is The Repeat Room by Jesse Ball. I own The Diver's Ball, or The Diver's, I think it's The Diver's Ball by him, which is still one of my favorite books. I think it's really interesting, and I was really excited for this. And I think I kind of talked about this just in my review. You can see right here, there's this this break in the middle. This is, it's basically a whole different story at the end. It is related to the first part of this book. I really liked the first part. I was not a fan of the back part. So that's kind of an issue. I would recommend The Diver's Ball before I recommend this. But it was very interesting. The Repeat Room is sort of like, it takes place in a dystopian society where everyone has to do jury duty, but jury duty involves putting on this helmet where you experience a crime from the perspective of the person who did it. And there's sort of this, like, you have to repeat the crime and consider what was done wrong. And it does feel like torture, both for the jury people and for the person who's having to experience it again. So it was really interesting. This first half, I think, has a lot to talk about when it comes to, like, criminal justice and what we as a society, like, what our responsibilities are for holding each other accountable for heinous actions. And even, but more even that, it was just this question of, like, what is it to be a person who would not be incriminated? Like, who do you have to be to not be considered criminally divergent from social norms? That, I think, is what is explored in this first part. And basically people are worried that they will be seen as a criminal when someone explores their ideas. And not because they've done anything wrong, but because they're not following certain ideas about what is the correct behavior. Let's do correct behavior. So I do recommend it, but yeah, just I this last half, I kind of skimmed it. I think I would recommend skimming it because it gets really graphic, and I don't know that it adds that much to the conversation that happens in the beginning. So the first half, definitely worth reading. Second half, you kind of just have to, like, plow through it. All right, this one I tried a couple of weeks ago. You can see I actually have some tabs in this. I am going to be trying to tab more often. This one is like, Charles Baxter has been around for a really long time. I've never read anything by him. I didn't really enjoy this book very much. It does feel like it's from a different era, kind of. Like, I don't really see it as a contemporary book, but it did just come out. So this is contemporary, but it feels like it's written in the 90s or something. And that's probably because Charles Baxter is, oh, hey, I should keep those. So yeah, that's what I do with my Post-its a lot of the time, is I just stick them in the back of the book so that they're there when I need them. So I need to put that back in my container. But yeah, so you can see he's an older guy. And I think that played into my experience of reading this book. So the idea here is you can take a blood test and it will tell you what your, like, destiny is. I don't know what I actually, like, what does this say? This says, annoying old man shit. Yeah, so there you go. He's, like, complaining about the doctor being Gen X or Y or millennial or whatever. And I'm like, dude, like, we're adults now. Can you treat us like it? Like, it's such a, like, Gen X boomer thing to do. It's so annoying. So there were things like that throughout this. Like, there's also, like, he is told through the blood test that he's gonna do a crime. And I think it's just, like, he'll become a criminal is what it tells him. And so then, like, immediately he's like, okay, well, I guess I might as well just do crime then, because they told me that I would. I'm like, dude, that is not what? No, that's not how it works. So I don't know if it gets better later, but like I'm done. I'm just not interested at all. I'm so over it. Like it's just it's written by an old man, and it reads that way. So I don't know if there's like some enlightenment later on in the book, but this up till here, not enlightened at all. And this is like 30 pages in, and that's 40 pages. Look, I made it to page 38. So like I tried and I was not impressed. So we're getting rid of that one. This one I skimmed. So this one's due today. I barely read it. I skimmed it really quick. I think it might be interesting. So this is Symbiote by Michael Nayak. And I don't really know what happens, but it's like in Antarctica, and some sort of like symbiote starts taking over the people who are at the facility there. And I only really read this part right here, and it does switch to using plural secondary pronouns of we when it's a character performing certain actions, and I like that. That always kind of gets me. So yeah, like, we know Yanis has been called eager enough to know the resentment the support crew harbors for the scientists. We know. So, I mean, like, that indicates that there's a consciousness that is the people who were living in the Antarctic, and they've sort of developed a plural identity between themselves and the symbiote. So it might be kind of interesting. And when I looked this up, it said that it was like the Plague Wars. Yeah. Book 1, the Ice Plague Wars series. So I assume there's going to be more books. I have to return this today, which means that somebody else asked for it, which means that maybe it's more popular than I had given it credit for. I don't know if I'll ask for it again. But I feel like I kind of like got what I needed to out of it. So I'm not sure. All right, just a couple more here, guys. So Everything Must Go. This is a nonfiction book by Dorian Lynskey. This is sort of like, it's more of a lit theory book, because he's exploring all of those kinds of stories that we tell about the end of the world. So, you know, the H.G. Wells War of the Worlds comes up. Also that Don't Look Up, the movie from a few years ago, that I felt was a little bit overdone with the need to shame people, I guess. But anyway, he talks about that, and then some other things that I had never heard of, like a book that came out before War of the Worlds, and was kind of like maybe taken advantage of when it came to other science fiction that we all know about. I guess 2001 Space Odyssey comes up too. So I think this is a really interesting book. It is dense, so it's not an easy read. I didn't get very far. You can see my post-its only go so far. But I don't think I have time to read much more of it, so I think I'm probably going to return this today, or very soon, if not today. So, yeah, that one, I don't know if I'd recommend it, but it's an interesting, so if you're into lit theory, there's not a lot of lit theory coming out these days. That one being about sci-fi and, like apocalypse stories, which are very popular. I think it was interesting, and I would suggest kind of at least giving it a bit of a skim, I guess, just to get a basic concept of what his argument is here, because I think it is pretty interesting that we are constantly telling stories about the end of the world. All right, Y2K. You know, this one I don't think is due, and I didn't get very far, so I might actually just keep this one for a bit. But I really enjoyed what I read of this. I think she gets much more into what it really felt like to live in the Y2K, and more importantly, what we have lost since then. Like, this isn't really just a nostalgia book. I think a lot of the time when we get these books that are about a certain era, we get this idea of nostalgia. Like I read one about the 80s where it was sort of like, it was a simpler time. Everybody was seeking joy. And it's too bad that we left that. And of course, I think that book was written in the early 2000s. So it was still being written during a peak period. And her whole argument here is Colette Shade, Y2K, essays on the future that never was. I think that subtitle is really important. So she's basically saying in the early 2000s, there was this promise of a future that was better than what we had. We all believed it was going to get better. And then everything fell apart in 2008. And she talks about just like the sense of loss that an entire generation has, because then being millennials, there was an understanding, there was knowledge, we believed that the future was going to be good. And then we got to adulthood and everything fell apart. And I mean, we had some inkling of that in 2001 with 9/11 and everything that came after that. And the school shootings that started up in 2000 as well. We had, I think that there was a sense of loss from the very beginning. And she talks about all of that too. Like how we kept believing things were going to get better. And in some ways, a lot of things have. Technology has definitely improved, and there's a lot of things that we have access to that we didn't then that are better, but there is this sense of like, what happened, like how did we end up here? And she talks a lot about that. So I think that's really interesting, that it is sort of nostalgia, but it's also more of a nostalgia for a future that never came and that we think might be lost now, and that hole that exists in our psyche of what we hoped would be possible and now no longer believe can happen. So yeah, it's I think a really interesting book. One of the best books I've seen of this, because I also looked at like Klosterman's The 90s, and I don't think it had quite that sort of complex thing going on. It had it a little bit, but I think it was more of just a like remembering the time and thinking of it as a moment when a lot of interesting things were happening and that we have since moved on. But I don't think it was really talking about this concept of what never came to be. And that I think is a really important aspect of life today, of, we had so much promise and it has not come to fruition, and we hope that it will, but it's not looking great, So I really appreciated this book. I think I will keep this for a little bit because I don't think it's due yet. I don't really know why I put it in this stack. I guess I need to just go through that. This is another one that I did a little bit of tabbing in, and I mostly just skimmed. There's only 3 tabs here. But this is Mona by Pola Oloixarac, maybe? I don't really know how to say it, sorry. But she's Peruvian, and this is about a author who was invited to a conference, an international writing conference. And this is actually an older book. I think this was mentioned in something else that I was reading, because this is from 2019 and translated in 2021. So this is like 4 years old now. But I always have issues with books about writers. I think it can get very, it talks about an experience that only so many people are going to have, and it only speaks to writers. And I'm not a professional writer. I do write, but I don't think of myself as a writer. I'm definitely not a writer in this kind of a way where it's more academic. And I mean, there's things that I recognize in here from other writers that I do know and have followed. And I think it can be interesting. It's kind of like Rachel Cusk is another one who writes a lot about being a writer. And I think her take on it is a little bit more interesting. There's the last book of the Transit trilogy by her is called Kudos. And it talks a lot about what happens at conferences and how it is very incestuous, the praise that happens amongst writers, and in these kinds of retreats and conferences that I don't think happens or should happen. Like I think it's kind of weird, honestly. And this kind of acknowledges some of that weirdness, I think. And I think the thing that I liked the most about it was that it is an international conference, so everybody is coming from a position of vulnerability, and like they are from populations and countries that are often seen as developing and lacking in culture and that kind of thing. And obviously anybody who comes from those countries is like, we're good. Like we've got, I'm a writer there. Like we can do that. And there's one part where I tagged one of these, I think, is where our author gets up and he talks about like how he's voicing, yeah, here it is. To all who remain in Iran, to all the people of my village, to all the women oppressed by the regime, and to everyone whose voice has been silenced, I say to you, I will be your voice. I'm here in this world to be your voice. And then another woman stands up and she's like, you're not my voice, actually. So I thought that was really interesting, how there is this interplay between these people who are all sort of vying for a spot in this academic world. And they're doing it through identity politics, which is something that gets thrown around as an accusation quite a bit, and she's sort of exploring that idea of what it means to be like a token at a conference of this kind, and that everybody here is a token of some sort. So I thought it was interesting. I don't know that I'm going to give it any more time than I have, but I'm glad I kind of picked it up and looked at it. All right, so that is my library return pile for today. I don't know that I'm making these videos for you or me, but there you go. That was my last couple of weeks of reading. I didn't even get into, I actually pulled out another phone that I have, like I was showing you, the Martha Wells. I've also been reading a couple of other books on here. I think I was reading Pure Color, and I'm a Fan is another one that I've been giving a lot of time lately. Those are both really short books and I have not finished them. I started listening to Hamajang Luck. I started listening to This Fatal Kiss, which is kind of a romantasy. I don't think I'm gonna be reading much more of that though. And there's a couple of nonfiction books on here that I'm kind of excited about. Oh, and this is a fantasy book that I saw recommended on YouTube, so kind of excited about that too. So there's been other reading, and it's been a couple of weeks since I did any sort of discussion of what I've been reading, so hopefully I'll start doing these more frequently. Hopefully I'll get better at making the lighting not suck. I have some ideas about what to do here that might make these videos a little better, but this is as good as it's gonna get for now. So yeah, hopefully nobody ever watches this and it doesn't matter. Okay, I'll check in with you guys sometime soon. Thanks.